The gentleman with spectacles informs a man named Theodore Miller that he is not destined to become a wizard. The professor alerts the young man of his ideal grades in theoretical knowledge, but his situation with magic is critical. In order to have a chance at graduating from the academy, Theodore must pass practical tests. However, he has not even mastered the second level of magic yet. The professor hands Theodore his diploma and dismisses him, reminding him that this year will be decisive for him. Theodore has always heard mockery directed towards him because he was unable to acquire magical abilities despite years of study. Nevertheless, he has gone through too much to stop now. After a difficult conversation, he has no choice but to retreat to the library. Reading books has become his salvation. Since he cannot apply his knowledge practically, he has decided to thoroughly study the theory. He has reread most of the books countless times. Suddenly, he comes across a strange book he has never seen before. As soon as the protagonist touches it, a peculiar creature appears and attacks his hand, causing him to fall to the ground in confusion. The strange voice calls out to him, pleading for help, but there is no one around. The voice then instructs him to look at his palm, where he sees the black creature. The creature brazenly spoke with Theodore, and the first thing it did was to devour a book despite the young man's protests. Subsequently, a vast amount of new knowledge appeared in the protagonist's mind. Although he had never been able to use magic before, the voice in his head now instructed him on the steps to take, and he finally managed to cast his first spell, a lightning strike. The voice continued to speak with Theodore, informing him about the study of new spells, and also about the fact that the gluttonous monster on his hand was hungry and needed to devour several books soon. The creature refused to answer any questions until it was fed. The young man struggled to comprehend what was happening, but one thing was clear: if he didn't feed the glutton, he would become its meal. He was not afraid, but rather saw what had happened as an opportunity to study magic. The monster promised to reveal its name after it was fed. During the feeding process, he learned much about the creature's origins. The glutton had been around for many years and could increase its strength and satiate its hunger by consuming various magical objects. The books it consumed gave power to its owner. If the book was not understood by the glutton's owner, the knowledge would be useless to him. Theodore fed the new pet book after book, and suddenly felt a painful effect from absorbing too much information. In the end, he could barely withstand the process, but the glutton was now satiated and ready to answer the young man's question. The creature's name was already known to him thanks to the voice in his head, and he had wasted his question. As it turned out, after eating, the monster would sleep for a long time. But before that, it could honestly answer any one question. Meanwhile, the glutton was falling asleep and asked the bearer to ask the main question quickly. Now Theodore is contemplating his question more carefully since he has the chance to ask one more. He inquires about the essence of the glutton, what it is. It is a complex question for the creature since human understanding is very limited. It can only visually show the answer, and thus a strange neon pink space appears around the young man. A gigantic creature stands before him, extending its tentacles to bring the protagonist closer to itself and its terrifying mouth. It is difficult for Theodore to remain in this place, and so he quickly returns to his reality. And the glutton informs him that this is the maximum amount of information his brain can comprehend. After that, the creature falls asleep. The young man tries to comprehend what has happened, and he still has many questions about the glutton. But the voice in his head, which served as a kind of tutoring, was able to answer some of them. The creature will wake up once a day to eat and answer a question. Based on how easily it communicates with the bearer, Theodore is not the first. It is also clear that this creature is a salvation for a weak outcast who was unable to master magic. The protagonist cannot help but smile, for now, all his problems are solved, and he will absorb as much knowledge as he can. Students are running around the academy, breaking the rules. The teenagers are simply enjoying each other's company, and the professors are watching them. Professor Vince speaks animatedly with his colleague about the students and how quickly their youth has passed. It turns out that Professor Vince is planning to stay in the academy during the holidays. Though he cites a heavy workload, his interlocutor easily understands that the reason is an underperforming student. The men do not continue their conversation, as now is not the time or place to discuss such matters. An unpleasant-looking man approaches the professor and invites him to a conversation. The man came to Professor Vince to clarify information regarding the education of the main character. He didn't know whether the boy had been expelled or not. Vince immediately understood who was being referred to, as the boy from a once influential noble family had caused a lot of trouble during exams. Nevertheless, the professor defended his student in the eyes of the visitor, and even called the man a fool after he left. He believed in Theodore. Meanwhile, the main character was gradually getting used to life with the gluttony. He learned to distinguish books by their usefulness, without even reading them, thanks to a special ability that had opened up to him. Now, he had chosen several good books and awakened the pet to feed him. However, there was one problem. The gluttony was very picky about what he ate. Now, he refused to eat the book offered to him and even expressed his dissatisfaction with his carrier, who had such a wonderful ability, but couldn't choose proper food for him. The creature noticed a very valuable book, an original manuscript by Prince Alfred Balance on ballistic magic. He had used a unique type of magic that resembled an arrow and could hit the enemy from a distance. Though he had a relatively weak form of magic, it had enabled him to achieve greatness through perseverance. This was precisely what the main character needed. However, the book was very valuable and there could be problems if it disappeared. Theodore decided to take the risk for the sake of great power and fed the creature with this book. At the same time, he started teleporting during the author's lifetime, synchronizing with him and his memories. The main character beholds the battlefield, perceiving it through the eyes of Prince Alfred, but he is unable to move or change anything. He can only observe what is happening. Perhaps this is the ability of synchronization. Meanwhile, a general from one of his squads approaches the prince and asks him to lead the troops, but Alfred refuses him and decides to do it himself. He is full of determination and geared for victory, so he charges toward the enemy with a triumphant shout. A long, intense battle ensues, and ultimately Alfred throws down his weapon and challengingly declares to the enemies that if any of them are willing to fight him one-on-one, that person can try to attack him right now. The enemy commander thinks that the prince is too full of himself and decides to attack him and take his head. But Alfred, with the help of his well-honed magic, kills him instantly and then attacks his entire army. Meanwhile, the main character is astonished by these skills, clearly seeing how much he studied and practiced this technique. After the battle, Alfred's servants bring a marquis with tied hands to him. The marquis screams at the knights and throws unwise words. The prince doesn't listen to him and simply beheads him with magic, feeling disgusted even by the blood of the wretch that has landed on his face. Afterwards, he orders the criminal's body to be burned, as he is not even worthy of a burial. When everyone leaves, Alfred turns to the main character and orders him to return to his own world. The boy must answer his own questions. At that moment, synchronization with the author's life comes to an end. Theodore is back in the library. Although he did not get an answer, he can now use the author's special magic from the book. He tries to test it in practice, and something strange happens. The strength that Theodore acquired from the book devoured by the gluttony breaks the ceiling, and it is difficult to control its unstoppable power. He realizes that his body is still too weak for such skills, as when the force finally subsided, his hand was in a terrible condition. The reason is that his magical level remained the same, while his abilities became much stronger. This gives Theodore an idea of what to ask the gluttony this time. He asks the creature to tell him about the most effective way to raise his magical level. At that moment, new abilities are revealed, such as the gluttony being able to feed even in a sleeping state, absorb artifacts, and thus increase the bearer's magical level. This means that not only books will be involved now. The Academy has a multitude of magical items, but they are much better guarded than books. Therefore, the main character decides to go beyond the walls of the educational institution. Fortunately, the professor is delighted to grant him permission to leave the gates. However, the man advises the student to try something other than magic. Theodore firmly refuses, as he does not consider such options. The professor suspects that the boy has found a way to master magic. Theodore steps outside. He is asked to return no later than 7 o'clock. Over the years, he has not been to the city, and it has hardly changed. He walks along a crowded street and sees many shops selling artifacts, but he is looking for a special place. At the entrance, memories from years ago overwhelm him. He remembers his former friends, but now he does not want to have anything to do with those who treated him so cruelly. A girl in a hat greets him inside the store. She suggests that the main character take a closer look at the items, as she does not really know anything about them. In such places, one should be cautious, as it is easy to catch a curse for life due to carelessness with artifacts. Theodore is lucky in this regard, as he has the gluttony. He allows the creature to touch the item and uses its skill to evaluate its usefulness. Theodore discovered a plethora of magical artifacts in the shop, much more than he had anticipated. He approached the vendor with a huge bag of goods, but offered only 20 silver coins instead of the 2 gold coins requested by the enigmatic shopkeeper. Intrigued by the young man's knowledge of the artifacts, she tested him by asking him to appraise her pipe. Theodore accurately described all of the pipe's features, prompting the woman to suspect that he was an appraiser. He did not deny it, as he truly possessed such a talent, but he refused to reveal the true reason for his skills. Instead, he proposed a mutually beneficial arrangement. He would appraise all of the shop's merchandise in exchange for some damaged artifacts for his research. The shopkeeper initially thought he was trying to deceive her, as such a service typically cost a fortune. But Theodore suggested that they sign a promise of loyalty contract, with their lives at stake. Although the woman realized that he had not intended to reveal the reason behind his proposal, she accepted the contract, ensuring confidentiality. All that remained was to carry the huge bag home before the gates closed. The main character barely made it before the gates closed, collapsing on the academy's grounds, unable to stand. Later, after returning to his dormitory and taking a shower, he decided to feed the gluttony with a small pendant. This time, the experience was completely different from consuming books. He heard a voice in his head informing him that his power had increased, and he looked at other artifacts, realizing how much further he could raise his level. Thus, Theodore fed the creature with 15 items. Gradually, he felt his skills increase and the hunger of the creature was satisfied. Finally, the amount of his magic surpassed the level to which he belonged, and he tried his best, closing his eyes, to move on to the next level. As winter break drew to a close, by the time other students began returning to the academy, the protagonist had been training his body, and had already achieved success in this endeavor. His motivation came from the synchronization he felt with the memories of the book's author. At first, it was difficult, but he got used to it over time. Only now, after 3 years, he had reached the same level as the other students in his group. Moreover, the protagonist confidently moved on to the 3rd level of magic. It seemed that Theodore had become complacent and had comfortably settled on the heated couch. A group of people entered the hallway and immediately began to mock the student for not being able to master magic. They ordered him to stand up from his comfortable spot, but the protagonist simply refused. When the leader of the group attempted to attack him, the protagonist easily blocked the blow, which shocked those around him. Theodore himself didn't understand why the opponent with his own skills couldn't block the blow, as he had done. A week passed and classes began. The protagonist sat in his chemistry class listening to a lecture. They began studying a particularly complex formula, and the teacher warned students that this formula was unstable and could easily lead to the creation of poison. The teacher chose to ask Theodore a simple question, as he had been in her class for 3 years. The protagonist easily answered the question, but the teacher was convinced that he had nothing to be proud of. She publicly humiliated the protagonist and called for the creation of a simpler formula to show that he was incapable. Behind his back, everyone was mocking him. The chemistry professor has despised the main character for a long time, as he always asked too many questions. Once, during her lesson, he corrected a term she used because it was outdated, and since then she has disliked him. If he had come from a wealthy family, things might have turned out differently. Currently, the main character is mixing a formula that he has managed to do perfectly. All the students are shocked at how easily he found the perfect proportions, and the professor is furious that the boy succeeded. Furthermore, he used a formula that had been recently updated for better mixing. Rumors of the underachieving student's success spread throughout the academy. Other professors began giving him difficult assignments that he would have never been able to handle before, and the tests were often beyond the course program. Everyone just wanted to test his new abilities. This way, he was able to put into practice all the techniques that he had previously only known in theory. In addition, the tests helped him to achieve the 4th level of magic, which was also very beneficial. Now he was stronger than anyone else in the course. The boy who lost to him in the hallway and his companions were not at all happy with their tormentor's fame. They decided to take revenge and chose a lesson in magical dueling for this purpose. During this class, Professor Vince talked about the necessity of his subject, as the state needed combat mages most of all. He also mentioned the rules of duels, which all students were required to follow, and any violations would result in expulsion from the academy. Then the first pair of opponents for the duel was announced: Garcia Carter, the boy who intended to take revenge on the main character, and secondly, Theodore Miller himself. It was clear from the start that this would not be an easy duel. From the very beginning, Garcia Carter has been hostile and feels a clear superiority over the weak student. The professor asks the boy to slow down and save his strength for the upcoming duel, and reminds him that the fight is conducted for educational purposes. The man flips a coin and Garcia Carter is the first to attack. He unleashes a powerful lightning strike, and the boy is confident that his opponent won't be able to withstand it. In this situation, the main character does seem a little weaker, but this is necessary for him to use an unexpected attack. In response, the boy makes a fiery counterattack, but of course, his opponent had prudently created a barrier. However, Theodore was prepared for such a turn of events and directed all the power of his strike at one point, thus breaking through the strong barrier. This only infuriated Garcia Carter, and he decided to create a fireball, although it would take a lot of his strength. He was sure that this would be the last attack of the duel. The main character chooses a triangular shield to deflect the attack, and after that, the battlefield is filled with smoke. Everyone thinks that the underachieving student did not survive, but he emerges unscathed. His opponent had exhausted his strength and asked for a break in the attack until his mana had been restored. However, the main character does not respond to his requests. He makes one last strike to emerge victorious. Other students are shocked that such a weak boy defeated Garcia Carter himself. It is a disgrace for the wealthy boy, and so he refuses to accept defeat. To prove that he is not weak, Garcia Carter demands a duel in case the main character wins, and this time, he will be ready to admit his defeat. Garcia Carter demands a rematch with the main character, feeling that the previous duel was unfair. Vince Hadel is very surprised by the student's defeat, and he did not expect Theodore Miller to win. However, the professor understands that if rumors of the student's defeat spread, his family's reputation will be destroyed, which explains the boy's actions. Moreover, the professor realizes that the student will not hesitate to use enhanced artifacts to avoid another defeat. His eyes burn with fury. Without further ado, the winner of the previous fight assumes a stance, indicating his approval and readiness to fight again. Vince Hadel still doubts the capabilities of the wayward student. Garcia Carter utters a spell, and his fists glow with fiery light as he strikes them against each other, summoning something. His body is engulfed in flames. The main character thinks it's madness. The defeated student transforms, screaming about his explosive fiery embodiment. A dialogue ensues between the opponents. The previously defeated student is confident that he is now unbeatable, while the victor says it's foolishness. Garcia threatens the main character and offers him to surrender. Theodore Miller thinks differently. He despises the idea that his opponent has chosen to play unfairly, especially by using such a tactic against a supposedly weaker opponent. The main character has no plans to retreat. The previously transforming student laughs wickedly and attacks the youth with his invincible fiery power. However, Theodore Miller has a worthy response. He uses an earth barrier to protect himself from the fiery attack. In the next moment, everything is covered in dust and smoke from the impact. Only stone fragments are visible around. The spectators of the duel are puzzled as to why the youth used a stone block, and they assume that he's dead. The opponent begins to rejoice in victory when suddenly the main character emerges from the stone debris, completely unscathed, responding to his opponent's humiliation of his intellectual abilities. Those who watch the battle, including the professor, are in complete shock. The fight is over. The main character has once again emerged victorious, and the professor approaches his defeated opponent. He hits the student in the face with special malice, knocking out his teeth and sending him flying to the side. Vince Hadel punishes the loser for his unfair fighting tactics. The beaten student tries to justify his pitiful action before the professor. However, the professor is not willing to listen to the boy's excuses, as he witnessed everything with his own eyes. He grabs the young man by the collar and responds aggressively. Despite the defeat, the student continues to try to gain the professor's sympathy, but he receives a bitter response: the truth. The man throws the boy aside again and orders him to come to his office after classes to discuss his punishment. The professor also instructs the main character to come to the laboratory after the end of the school day. This surprises the boy a lot. Later that evening, as instructed by the professor, the main character goes to the school laboratory, contemplating the reasons for his summons. He assumes that it may be related to the extremely strong changes in his magical abilities, and he fears that he might be suspected of something. He realizes that he cannot reveal the true reason behind these changes, so he will have to keep it hidden. No one should find his assistant, as it could lead to a misunderstanding. Before entering the room, the boy knocks on the door. Then he walks inside, wondering why he was called there. The professor offers him a seat opposite himself and begins the conversation. He explains that he was worried about the main character, as he could have been injured during the fight. Then he reveals that the situation was resolved by various sides, and the father of the losing student personally came to apologize for his son's behavior. It was a difficult situation, especially for the academy they were attending. Even the school director was afraid to deal with these problems. However, luckily, everything turned out well. The professor shows the artifact that the losing student used, which gave him such a powerful ability. The main character is confused and does not fully understand what to say. He only looks at the artifact with interest, trying to remember its name. The teacher explains the mechanism of the artifact to the boy and informs him that, as an apology, the Count, the losing student's father, will be giving this artifact to the main character. This shocks the winner, who cannot believe what he is hearing. The professor threatens to expel the Count's son if the artifact, as an apology, is not accepted. Therefore, the student reluctantly agrees to take the artifact. Vince Hader asks the hero how he changed so much after the winter break, almost becoming a completely different person. The professor is curious about the answer but does not insist on it. He offers his help in the future. Theodore Miller is very confused and uncertain about what to do in this situation. Should he tell the truth or remain silent? He is worried about his assistant, but he also realizes that the truth will eventually come out. Therefore, he agrees to tell the man everything. He draws the professor's attention to his left hand, and the man frowns disapprovingly and asks about it. The boy tells his assistant to leave. Then, from his hand, a black creature emerges. The boy says it's time for lunch, and his hand begins to glow. It's a curse of gluttony. This shocks the man even more. The professor contorts in complete bewilderment at what he has just witnessed. He doesn't understand what is happening, so he simply observes. The main character remembers his first conversation with the teacher, what always troubled him from within. The lack of necessary skills, which significantly impaired his performance and life. Afterwards, he recalls the professor's phrase about admiring his knowledge and offering support. As soon as he heard this sensible opinion about himself, hope appeared in the hero's mind. The professor had not seemed like an enemy to the student all this time, so he was the one the boy decided to trust now. The monster emerged from the protagonist's left palm straight onto the artifact previously given as an apology to the boy. Theodore Miller orders the monster to eat the artifact, which it promptly does. The creature greedily grabs the large red stone with its tongue and stuffs it into its mouth, then disappears back into the palm. The boy starts to writhe, transforming the artifact eaten by the monster into his own power before the eyes of the professor. This shakes him. Vince Hader asks for everything to be explained to him. The boy shares all the existing information, telling the truth of what really happened. The main character is very nervous after his story, fearing the man's reaction and his own future. The teacher smiles as he recites all the information aloud, in order to better understand and confirm it. In the young man's hand is a greedy grimoire, consuming magical books, artifacts, and the like, possessing unimaginable power, able to assimilate and use the acquired object and information. The carrier of the grimoire possesses and uses the same abilities as it does. The professor does not approve of feeding the grimoire books from the library, for which the boy apologizes to him. The man understands that the main character had no choice. If the grimoire is not fed, it will consume its carrier. After clarifying all the details, the boy decides to ask the professor a question. The man calmly explains why he does not take the grimoire. The grimoire is not something valuable to high-level mages, and besides, the grimoire itself chooses its owner for life. If you kill the owner, the person who did it will immediately become a victim of the grimoire. The grimoire cannot be passed on to someone else. It lives, develops, and learns about the world together with its carrier. The professor thanks the young man for his trust and the story he told. He wishes to set a measure of limitation, a vow of trust. Vince Hader, using magic, swears to keep the boy's secret. Magic appears, sealing the professor's heart and imprisoning the secret within. By his own will, the man vowed to keep everything in secrecy, and this caused a mark to appear on his hand. The main character silently watched this and then burst into tears due to an overflow of emotions. The professor warmly pats him on the shoulder in comfort, and the boy thanks him for his action. A week has passed. The main character calmly sits in the lecture hall, bored and ruminating on his unchanging life. The professor helped the boy hide the absence of books eaten by the monster, so he didn't have any particular problems. Only the boy's plans did not please the man, as buying artifacts on the black market was a bad and dangerous idea. The teacher agreed to provide him with everything necessary, so now the main character no longer needed to go there. After class, the boy hurries to the professor, pondering on the entity that now lives with him quite comfortably. Upon entering the man's office, the boy notices the mess, assuming that the man decided to move. However, instead, he decides to show something to the boy. Vince Hader shows Theodore Miller a letter bearing the seal of the Kingdom of Malthor, an invitation to the kingdom's magical tournament. The professor will participate professionally, but he needs one more member in his team, and of course, he decides to take the main character. He offers this to the boy, and he happily agrees to go to the capital for the tournament. The professor scrutinizes the documents in his hands, afraid to find any errors, as it would prevent them from being admitted to the tournament. The main character is surprised by the pickiness of people in the capital, but the professor quickly explains why it is so. The risk of spies infiltrating is too great. Vince Hadel decides to explain why he specifically chose the main character to accompany him to the Royal Magic Tournament in the capital. The man begins to explain. The professor reads the Academy's code, which states that if a student takes third place or higher in a tournament under the guidance of a magical society, he is granted the right to finish the Academy early. The man assumes that the boy is bored with life within the Academy walls and has nothing left to learn, so he wants to give him a chance to graduate early. The main character doubts this after hearing it, wondering if it is worth it. The professor convinces the boy of his impeccable knowledge of magic. Despite reaching his third year, the boy could not find the books he needed to advance to the fourth, which is depressing. Theodore Miller's main problem lies in his excessive sensitivity to magic, which prevents him from moving forward. This is solved by the grimoire, but it also means that the reason for the boy's presence in the academy is absent. The professor sets the student on the right path. The main character agrees with the teacher, but admits that he doubts his victory. Vince Hadel does not believe in victory either, but he does believe that the boy has a chance. The student decides to take the risk. The man pulls out a book for the boy to replenish his knowledge. The man deliberately searched for an original book for the boy. The student summons the grimoire to evaluate the book. The book turns out to be a wonderful gift from the professor, the first of 3. The man promises to get the second one as soon as possible. The trip is in 3 days. While in his room, the boy hurries to feed the grimoire. He feeds it the gift, and it is very pleased with it and establishes a connection with the element. The boy's hands are pulled into another world, where he falls to the ground in front of an unknown man. The connection is made. The protagonist awakens in a parallel spiritual world, to which the grimoire has dragged him, thanks to the book he has mastered. The young man struggles to recall what happened previously, confused about where he is. A stranger with a white beard and an eye patch explains to him what has occurred. Theodore Miller notices the man, and he realizes that the youth recognizes him. The man introduces himself as Myrtlia Hersheim, a spirit. Theodore Miller understands that he is in a place that is a personal imprisonment of the spirit. According to the man, it is the territory of the destitute, a place where weary warriors sought to soothe the souls of their comrades during battles. The spirit is surprised that an ordinary human has found this place. The protagonist confesses that he was not prepared for this encounter, and that he did not come here intentionally. They converse about the youth's arrival in this place. Before continuing, the spirit decides to test the young man, forcing him to look into his eyes, which scares the protagonist. Judging by the youth's demeanor, the spirit concludes on his character and spirit. The spirit of fire does not suit him due to his caution and practicality. Furthermore, he does not match with the wind and water. The man concludes that the youth is just an ordinary person, boring and gray. However, the warrior spirit does not consider this a bad thing. Behind the spirit, a strange creature lurks, vaguely resembling a human, intently watching them. It laughs in response to the spirit's words. The man speaks of the protagonist's reaction behind his back, and then explains to the protagonist about his spirit and how he feels about him. The spirit then shows the protagonist some unusual creatures, coding them. A small earth spirit, Mitra, descends onto his palm, pleased to see him. The youth is embarrassed by its size, but the spirit affirms that it is not an indicator. The protagonist and the spirit decide to eat together. The man serves the youth a bowl of soup, but before he can eat it, he is whisked away back. The protagonist awakens in his bedroom with the earth spirit by his side. He is now ready to take action. This is the end of the first part. If you would like me to make a second part of this manhwa, please support the channel by giving it a like and leaving a comment. Additionally, please subscribe to the channel to stay updated on new videos.